What is up, everyone? Today is December 29th, 2023, the last Friday of the year. In a couple seconds here, I'll bring out our lovely crew of Bitcoiners with our personal favorite moments of 2023 for Bitcoin, for markets, and our predictions for 2024. Before we get into that, quick word from our sponsor, Beaver Bitcoin. This week's show is brought to you by Beaver Bitcoin. Dollar cost averaging is the most stress-free method to enter the Bitcoin space. And if you're looking for a simplified way of buying Bitcoin in Canada without needing to rely on a custodial exchange, Beaver Bitcoin is your best bet. Beaver Bitcoin lets you set up recurring Bitcoin purchases directly from your Canadian bank account and straight into a Bitcoin address that you control. It's like a savings account in a currency that you actually want, or a Netflix subscription that doesn't suck. And if you don't want to wait to stack sats, Beaver Bitcoin supports instant non-custodial Bitcoin buying via e-transfer as well. Give it a shot today at beaverbitcoin.com. All right, let's pull everyone up here. We got Boomer, Camila, Brandon. Quick introduction for those who don't know you, starting with Boomer.
Just a regular pleb in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. Here to talk some Bitcoin, talk some finance.
Nice.
I'll go. Okay. I'm Camila Campton. I've been a Bitcoiner since late 2020. I'm a mom, and this is my jam. Love talking about Bitcoin.
Nice.
There we go. And I am Brandon. I am founder of Green Candle. Got a couple podcasts, talk macro, Bitcoin, all the financial markets. So yeah, man, I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
All right. So first question, so much happened this year. And the craziest part is that I think we're all on the edge of our seat waiting for what happens next year with the ETF. That's in 10 days from this show. But in all the crazy things that happened this year, I want to start with you, Boomer, to kind of pick what you thought was the most pivotal thing. When we look back at the year 2023, 10 years from now, what are people going to remember from this year in Bitcoin history? Or what kind of stood out to you as the most important thing?
Well, it's been a crazy year, right? Like this has been like crazy. Like we talk about clown world all the time, and it just keeps getting clowner and clowner every single year. To me, the story of Bitcoin is just how far we've come in the past 12, 13 months. It wasn't that long ago that Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX were all over the news. And somehow Bitcoin got dragged into that mess. And here we are 13 months later, and Larry Fink, the boss over there at BlackRock, is talking about an ETF, and he's going on CNBC, and he's calling Bitcoin an actual flight to safety. So we went from being associated with scammers and scams to one of the most powerful men in the financial world going on TV and telling the world that our asset is safe.
So what do you think was the change of heart with that? Like all of a sudden, we had to see FTX fall, and then everyone was like, great, now we can come out of the woodworks. Like, where do you think he changed his opinion? Do you think it was just this year or something that maybe he figured out like 2 years ago?
Incentives, man. We all know it. It comes down to incentives. And when people realize that they can make some money out of something or gain some power out of something, they will change their tune on it. I have a feeling a lot of these guys have been talking about Bitcoin a long, long time, and they were waiting for the right opportunity to come in. And it seems like 2023, they're kind of hinting at it, and it kind of looks like 2024 is when they're really going to make their push into it. And in order for them to do that, they're going on TV and they're changing the narrative, right? Price has a lot to do with it. And I don't know what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Are they talking up Bitcoin because the price is higher and they see it as a way of gaining clout, or because they're talking about it, the price goes higher? Not quite sure. Could be a little bit of both, but we're definitely seeing a big change in the media. Still have a long way to go. We're not all the way there yet, but it's definitely the narrative definitely has changed.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Boomer. I think at a certain point, these guys are just tired of getting their returns just their ass beat by Bitcoin. I mean, every single year it seems like, Bitcoin's just flying super high and, beating all these traditional finance players. And it's really no surprise that we're seeing this ETF kind of come soon, right? I mean, we have BlackRock, it's major shareholder in Riot, Marathon Digital, in MicroStrategy. So they've been in Bitcoin for a while. So I agree with you there. When Fidelity kind of started putting out some content around Bitcoin, it added some validity to it as well. So I think a lot of these big players have kind of been lurking in the shadows, so to speak. And now they're just kind of starting to come to light here, coincidentally, right around the halving. So I agree with you 100%. I think these major players are starting to try to turn the narrative. And I think it's the narrative is starting to change, and it's going to change dramatically in 24.
I think it's really funny because when it comes to these guys, you definitely want to watch what they do, not watch what they say, because they're going to be spitting FUD. I'm pretty sure that next year is going to be the same thing. They're going to try to FUD this thing in order to get the price to maybe go lower so that they can buy as much as they can. Because if there's one thing we know about Bitcoin that a lot of people still don't realize, surprisingly, is the scarcity aspect. So the more that these big players are able to buy, the less that we're able to buy. So that's where we come in as the plebs, trying to educate other people on like, no, you need to get into this before all these big players come in, because then you're not going to be able to have much of this scarce asset as you would have, after they buy. So it's really interesting to see the narrative shift, who's listening, who's still not listening. I feel like we're stuck in repeat, to be honest. I'm excited about the whole ETF thing and just to see what happens, but I still feel like people are not waking up to this, which is really interesting. There is a narrative shift, but we're not completely there yet.
Yeah, I think one of the things, going off of what you guys are saying as well, is that they are sick of underperforming. And if, the majority of the world, whether through, direct ownership of mutual funds or pension funds, is in the 60-40 portfolio, they lost out big time this year, right? That 40% bonds is, I think it's, even with the little bounce that it's had this year, it's still down. Like those long-term treasuries are still down 10, 20%. Meanwhile, the DJI and the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 are at all-time highs. So you have this rock in people's portfolio right now, which is bonds. And if the story is that, we're going to be higher for longer, whether you believe that or not, I think it's clear we're not going back to zero anytime soon on rates. There needs to be something else in people's portfolio to catch up performance-wise. Like that is the big goal, is you have to keep up with whatever the S&P 500 does. And it's clearer than ever that bonds are the biggest rock. So just even selling a little bit of that off, getting into Bitcoin, I think that becomes a big narrative, maybe explicitly or maybe just subtly, that these ETF issuers are going to push, is that, hey, if there's going to be one thing that you sell, maybe loosen up on the bonds and pick up some Bitcoin, 1%, 2%, but you need to get off zero, essentially.
Yeah, something that's really funny is I remember a couple of years back when I started talking to my mom about Bitcoin, I told her, please ask your financial advisor what they think about Bitcoin. And she asked the financial advisor, and the financial advisor said, oh no, it's too risky. I wouldn't get exposed to that. And that's when I was like, you need to fire that guy right now, because you do need to get some exposure. And I think that's going to be the narrative shift now. All those financial advisors that said, no, don't get any exposure to Bitcoin because it's too risky. Now it's going to become too risky if you don't have any exposure. So,
well, I think the big thing is, in the past, like there's no real consensus mechanism for a financial advisor to get Bitcoin into someone's portfolio. Like, are they going to be the custodian of the Bitcoin? It's tricky, right? But now it's like as easy as just adding a stock into a managed portfolio. And so there's no incentive for them to keep stonewalling on it anymore, because they'll just be able to click one button and be like, yeah, here's your Bitcoin exposure. Keep paying me my like 1 or 2% management fee just to press a button, right?
The narrative change is not just in the financial world. I get my haircut, same barber. I've been going for about 1.5 to 2 years. And I go in there and I talk Bitcoin. I ask them, oh, you accept Bitcoin? And of course not, right? Like, how many times have you asked somebody if they accept Bitcoin and they look at you like you're an alien? Of course not, right? And over the past few months, I've noticed him kind of come around. To the last time that I was there, a couple of weeks ago, he started asking me about Bitcoin, because another one of his customers had come in and had told him this story about how he used Bitcoin to send money to his family in Lebanon. So now this barber who knows that I'm into Bitcoin is now asking me questions about it. So I'd be surprised, Camila, if your mom's financial advisor has changed their tune over the past 6 months or so.
I don't think we'll know because she did get rid of him because I was pretty orange pilling her hardcore, so she understood and took my advice. But I hope so.
Yeah, there should be career risk now for not recommending Bitcoin to people. People won't forget when you said, don't buy it, it's too dangerous. What about you, Brandon? What was your biggest Bitcoin moment of 23?
Yeah. So, I mean, there was a lot that happened in 23. I think, these past 3 months made us all really forget about the price action, just kind of crab walking throughout the entire year. So, the S&P 500 is on pace to beat out 2020 with that crazy amount of money printing. But we had Bitcoin kind of crab walking all up until the past like 3 or so months. And, despite a lot of cracks in the macro and, stocks, this S&P 500 essentially being held up by 7 companies, Bitcoin really rallied the past quarter just because of, Bitcoin specific news. So I think that has been extremely unique where, obviously we have, ordinals kind of coming in, raising the fees, making the transactions a little bit higher, and some other, things that might be a little like negative, but not necessarily like affecting the price as much. I think more people are seeing the price run up, which are making them, price is the biggest indicator, despite what many of us want to say, like during the bear market, that's what kind of turns the head of traditional finance, is seeing that number go up. And so, just seeing Bitcoin start to run on its own news is very, very encouraging. It's like, we're starting to get to the point where it's not, the jobs numbers that really matter. It's more about what's going on in the Bitcoin space. And I think as we get farther along, that's what's going to occur. We're going to get farther away from Bitcoin kind of riding the waves of these macro cycles and more into Bitcoin riding its own wave. So that's something that I, noticed this past quarter. Then I think, we have a lot to look forward to in 24.
Has there been a better year for stacking than 2023 when you think about risk adjusted stacking, right? But this crab walk that we had was so good. You would just, you put in as much as you could every month or every week, whatever you choose to do. The dollar cost average just really worked out really well.
100%. I mean, this was kind of the year too that I think, back to what you guys were talking about, more people got curious as well. Where, I've been in since I guess like 2016, 17 is kind of when I started to learn about Bitcoin. I was in grad school at the time, so I didn't have any really money to buy in. But, that's at that time, everybody was telling me I was crazy. Now I see a lot of people thinking, at least like that Bitcoin's going to stick around because it's been around for some time. And so they get a little bit more curious about that. And I think at this point too, everybody's at least heard of Bitcoin. And my big theory about orange pilling is it just takes a lot of touch points. So I think, back to what you were saying earlier, Boomer, with, traditional finance coming in and speaking about it, is say what you want about Elon Musk, but Tesla accepting Bitcoin for their cars, and, the traditional finance people going on CNBC and talking about Bitcoin, all these touch points is making people like my parents curious, at least. Like, they might not understand it or want to buy any or anything like that just yet, but they're asking me a little bit more about it now, just simply because, they're getting all those touch points. And I think that's another very encouraging thing as well.
There was that article that came out, I think it was The Economist or something, and it was about like, Bitcoin is this cockroach that just won't die. And I think that sentiment, between everyone pumping Bitcoin because they are ETF issuers, people are going to ask themselves that, like, hold on, like I was told this thing was dead. And I think I've been hearing about Bitcoin for 7-8 years. Like, I think it's easy to ignore Bitcoin the first time you hear about it, maybe the second time, but we're getting to the third or fourth time that non-financial people are going to be seeing this pop up in the news because of the Bitcoin cycles. And you have to ask yourself, and you have to throw away all pretension when you see something that just continually baffles. I did speak to a lot of people this year that were not in Bitcoin, and they still think it's crypto and they still think it's a scam, but they will have to face that reality when every single one of their friends and family starts talking about it in the new year, which I think is going to happen. So Yeah, it
Yeah,
humbles you.
it's such a crazy sentiment though, because a lot of those people that have heard about Bitcoin the sixth, seventh time may probably feel like they're too late in order to be able to kind of get in and be able to create something out of it, right? So it's kind of like a bittersweet moment for these people thinking, oh man, when I first heard about it, it was, I don't know, $100. I'm just making up a number, and now it's what, like they don't even realize the number when you tell them, oh, it's 42,000. 42,000, like when did that happen? People that are not watching the news and are not keeping up with these things, it's mind-blowing to them. So also just important to tell them, it's not too late. You can still get the real Bitcoin and just learn. It's a fun journey to get into, learn about what's going on in the world. You have no idea how many rabbit holes you can get down just with the word Bitcoin. So it's really interesting.
So Camila, was there a single event or news headline you thought from this year that kind of defined Bitcoin in 2023?
I'm going to keep it super lighthearted just because I love any FUD that comes around Bitcoin and the crazy clown stories that come out. So I've kind of had my head down this year because I became a mom and just trying to figure out that world. So whenever I would, started working again and seeing the news and stuff, the one thing that I remember catching my eye and just making me laugh was the whole news story about how a single Bitcoin transaction uses enough water to fill a swimming pool. So that just made me crack up. I don't know why. I just thought it was really funny. First of all, I thought we were over the whole energy thing, right? Like all these haters keep coming back with like bonker stories about how Bitcoin is ruining the world when they don't realize that fiat money is the one that's actually ruining the world. But that's a whole nother story. And so with the whole narrative shift, I found that funny. And then when we started seeing the commercials, not necessarily the ETF commercials, but these pro Bitcoin companies coming out with commercials. Like, I don't know if you guys remember the Coinbase one, when it was about the fiat world, how we have to get out of the system. I think it's super interesting how these very big companies are using a lot of money, because in order to make these commercials, it's a lot of money, a lot of talent that goes behind it. How they're putting money into that so that they can show even more Bitcoin to the world. And it's just super interesting how at first I thought the only people doing marketing videos were the plebs on Twitter. But now you see all these big companies going back, being part of the Bitcoin marketing team without even realizing it. It's just, I think that was the biggest change in 2023, and it's only the beginning. I wonder what other companies are going to start making Bitcoin commercials that are going to grab people's attention.
I know it's right now we're in the 2023 recap. We're not at the predictions yet, but you just made me think of something. The Super Bowl is coming soon, right? The Super Bowl is coming the end of January, beginning of February. Are we going to see a bunch of Bitcoin commercials during the Super Bowl?
Dude, I can't wait for this year's FTX ad. I'm really excited for that one. Sorry, David.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's so true. And in order to make these commercials, like, it takes time. So these companies have been thinking about Bitcoin for longer than we realized, right? Mm-hmm. Like they didn't just launch these commercials, like make it last week and then launched it today. No, it takes so many months in order for these products to actually come to life. So these companies have been thinking about Bitcoin. I think they've just been waiting for the perfect moment in order to be like, okay, I can show you guys the project I've made. And yes, we back Bitcoin, and it's only the beginning. So it's really cool to see that these companies have been thinking about Bitcoin for a while, and they're putting their money behind it.
It's hard to make ads for financial products. Like the amount of FCC regulations, that's why some of them are like, the one with the Dos Equis guy, it's kind of cool, and it's a throwback, but there's some others that are going to come out, and you're going to just think like, oh, these are so lame. Like, why are these so lame? And it's not just because they're TradFi people making them. It's that it's very hard to get anything past the FCC regulators to get on the Super Bowl that like promotes a financial product. I don't know how FTX got away with it, but specifically these brokers. On your point about the FUD, one of my favorite things that happened this year was the whole thing with that artist who made the Bitcoin skull head and the big smokestacks coming out of it, and how we just completely co-opted that and made it our own thing. Like everyone on Bitcoin Twitter made it their profile picture. A bunch of these 3D printing companies like Crypto Cloak started making 3D versions of it. I'll probably end up getting one on one of my shelves at some point. And then the guy who made that, he bears everything. He's like, oh yeah, like they paid me X amount to do this. And then, we start engaging with that guy. I don't know if it went anywhere, that artist, but he seemed to come around to a lot of the facts that we were telling him, that, Bitcoin is not bad for the environment. And a lot of this is FUD. And by the way, this organization that's against Bitcoin is funded and paid for by a shitcoin company. And so he's like, oh, I didn't know that. And it's just like, that's the spirit of Bitcoiners, is we'll take those FUD pieces like the swimming pool meme or, that whole thing, and we'll just make it our own. We'll just run with it. And I think that sort of makes us invincible culturally to some extent. But we'll see. We'll see for next year.
Some of it is an echo chamber. Like it is for us. Like we're all laughing at that skull. But it's kind of like an inside joke. That being said, I completely agree that there's diminishing returns on all these FUD stories. Like each and every one of them, fewer and fewer people are believing this garbage. And it's going to get to a point. And I think, honestly, like with the one that Camila talked about, that swimming pool story, I don't think that really caught on. Like it caught on for us. We co-opted that. We thought it was funny.
I think it was the same with the art piece. Like I don't think anyone saw
these are
that
not working anymore.
The Bitcoiners.
These are not working anymore. And I think the Greenpeaces, the Elizabeth Warrens, and whoever our enemies are, they're noticing that these stories aren't working anymore. And if you can't beat them, join them. And they're getting ready to join.
I think the plebs are the real cockroaches. Like you're going to try to smash our spirit, but we're just going to keep coming back and making it our own.
Yeah, like you cannot, like the data is there. You cannot scare us into selling our Bitcoin, no matter what you put out.
100%. And yeah, like all these FUD stories too. At first, like you were saying, it was, Bitcoin mining uses more energy than like countries. And now they're trying to at least get creative with it and says it takes up water, or enough water to fill a swimming pool. I mean, at least they're trying. I don't know, but I think they're running out of things. They're like grasping at straws at this point. So I think they're running out of FUD, which can be a positive sign too.
All right. My biggest event, if I can narrow it down to one thing this year, I had to choose between BlackRock submitting their ETF application as like the thing we'll remember from this year, or the grayscale ruling versus the SEC, where the judge said essentially that the SEC's reason for denying the spot ETFs was arbitrary and capricious. To me, that, people might not look back and say like, oh, that was the crazy event, but I think that is the most pivotal thing that happened this year, because these ETF applicants like Van Eck, ARK, Galaxy, like this is not like everyone just applied for an ETF this year. The Winklevoss twins have been applying for a spot Bitcoin ETF for 10 years. And there's a reason why it's moving this year. And I think it was essentially because of that ruling saying that, hey, there are futures products, there's futures ETFs. I know that the SEC wants the surveillance stuff, but there's no reason to discriminate. There's just no legal basis. And the judge, the judicial system came down here and kind of beat the bureaucrats on this and said, essentially, you can't have this as a reason to prevent the ETF. And basically ever since that event, this was back in September, the ETFs have moved along at a clip. You're seeing all this engagement with the SEC. We're going to get our approval probably in the next 10, 11 days. And I think without that court ruling, I think even BlackRock would have been stuck in that same cycle that Fidelity and Van Eck and all these companies have been in, which was just years of applying, getting pushed with the deadlines and eventually getting rejected for the same reason. And, maybe BlackRock would have thrown up a court case, but it was really Grayscale that took it on the heel here. And they won this case, and, to their detriment, because of course they've been saying, oh yeah, Grayscale, we want to do an ETF, but actually if they convert to an ETF, they're going to lose one of their biggest cash cows, which is GBTC. But yeah, I think that's the biggest case of the year. I think that is the sole reason that we're still talking about the ETF stuff, is because the judicial system came in strong and basically said it has to happen.
What do you think about the stuff happening alongside that, and if it's moving it forward or backwards? And I'm talking about the Binance stuff.
Yeah,
I'm talking about also with the recent resignations at GBTC. Didn't two of their board members resign recently? Are all these moves on a bigger chessboard to get an ETF.
The sheriff has definitely come to town. Like you're
Feels
right
that
with the
way.
Binance thing, Sam Bankman-Fried case, shutting down Signature Bank, all these
Yeah.
things like have kind of put the ducks in the line. But I still think that someone had to come out and tell the SEC that they couldn't use this as a reason anymore, because I think they would have just kept doing that as long as Gary Gensler was there and had his tenure.
And do you think he's still going to be there when we're here next year talking about
Oh,
2024 year in review?
He's out if Trump wins for sure. So we'll see. I don't think they'll remove him before the election, though.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think they'll remove him either. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of the court cases kind of around I guess the greater crypto markets, which seem to be kind of diluting Bitcoin. Those are kind of starting to fade by the wayside. It'll be interesting to see this upcoming cycle though, because I felt like last bull run the price was kind of suppressed by FTX, like Binance, some of these crypto casino players selling their customers paper Bitcoin. So, now with, actual big players coming in like BlackRock, like I'm sure we'll see a couple other, spot ETFs come in with those regulations around them. Like, will they be able to kind of like, I guess, issue paper Bitcoin? It'll be interesting to see kind of how that affects everything because, obviously there's the limited supply angle of Bitcoin. So the traditional finance piece, I think, just makes this year going to be more and more interesting.
Something that I absolutely love though about the other side with FTX and all of that was being able to separate Bitcoin from crypto. I think that's something that we've been struggling a lot for years now, where the common person thinks that Bitcoin and crypto are the same thing, but seeing that they are kind of hitting these people on the wrist and saying, no, you can't just do this. And that, Bitcoin is pumping other coins. Ethereum, I thought you were going to flip Bitcoin a long time ago. What happened, right? Like just saying that it's kind of like not going at the same pace makes me really happy to see that, okay, this is actually a great effort for us to continue moving forward and trying to explain to people that Bitcoin is not crypto and to kind of just focus on the winner here. Those other things are speculative in my opinion and people shouldn't bother.
I think what I'm really curious to see, and the SEC and regulators are going to have to confront this, is what the official jurisdiction is going to be for Ethereum. Because if they say that an Ethereum ETF can go through because it's not a security, that is going to give a lot of power to a lot of these other, layer one or whatever blockchains to say, hey, we launched the same way as Ethereum. We did the 70% pre-mine. We have a foundation. We keep it at arm's length. Like we're kind of doing the same thing. And the SEC will have to figure out, well, why is, Polkadot or other shitcoin a security, but Ethereum is not. I think they're in a hard place because I think naturally a long time ago they should have, officially declared Ethereum a security, and they missed the boat on that. Now there's futures and all this stuff on it. So now because it's like, a 200 billion market cap thing, they can't really come in and call it a security without causing a lot of damage, or they'll have to have like a damage control plan if that is the route they want to go down. So I think that's an interesting thing to watch. As a Bitcoiner, I don't really care what happens in Ethereum land, but if we get an Ethereum spot ETF, and there's a lot of people who think that's a possibility for next year, and there's a lot of applications in, I think BlackRock included, or one of these big financial organizations, then you might see some more muddying of the water of like Bitcoin crypto into next year, because, people will be able to say, oh, I have a bit of Bitcoin ETF and a bit of Ethereum ETF. And, oh, there's a Solana Link shitcoin ETF coming around the corner too.
I have spent exactly 0 minutes and 0 seconds thinking about the Ethereum ETF.
Good.
I could care less. I could absolutely care less. I am half curious. I don't know what Solana is. I don't know what it does. I don't know anything about it, but I have been curious to see the real flippening, the flippening of Solana and Ethereum. So I'm curious to see that, the next year and a half, if we're talking about Solana in the same way we're talking about Ethereum now, and Ethereum is just gone.
I don't know if it's next year, but I think maybe in like 5 years, Tether will flip Ethereum.
I like that take.
They've been doing pretty well. All right. Let's zoom out a little bit, get out of just the Bitcoin sphere. In terms of any stories, maybe more so macro and markets, world of finance, Boomer, what stood out to you as sort of the biggest story of 2023?
I'm going to say inflation. And before everybody says, well, that was more of a 2022 story. And
It's
I
transitory,
agree.
dude.
Yeah, it's transitory. I want to talk about that too. Since you brought it up, have you noticed recently more and more people bringing that up again? People are actually saying that. People are actually like, the transitory thing is coming back. It's making
It was only
a comeback.
2 years, bro. Come on.
Unbelievable. No, I still think it's inflation. I think inflation is the biggest story of the year in the macro world. And I know it's down. I know inflation is down from where it was in 2022, but it's still high. We're still pretty close to 4%. And if you look at the inflation just of food and of housing, it's a lot higher than that. And the real story to me is the difference between what the people are telling you on TV about inflation and what the average person on the street is feeling with inflation. It's diametrically opposed. I've been watching a lot of macro TV, and I listen to quite a bit of podcasts. Like I listen to Wealthy On all the time, and I listen to like Looney Hour, and people are talking like the inflation battle is won. And if you ask anybody on the street, anyone, it is not. So that to me is the biggest story of the year, and I'm hoping that they're right. You know, the people saying that inflation is over. I hope they're just early and it'll go away. But I have a feeling this is maybe just a little bit of a slowing down before the rates get cut and we're off to the races again.
Well, I mean, I agree with you, Boomer. But I mean, if you look at, I guess, the traditional finance metrics, right? I mean, these are what the trad5 people kind of look at. Inflation has been like, I guess, level. It's in stagflation is what they want to call it. But the problem is like, you know, we had inflation like crazy for, you know, the past like year and a half or so, and these prices aren't going to come down, right? I mean, everybody's gotten used to paying. I mean, I'm just tossing numbers here, but if you went to Jiffy Lube, for example, to get your oil change and it went from 50 to $75, well, now that inflation is tamed, they're not going to bring it back down to $50, right? They're going to keep it at 75, but because it was 75, like, I don't know, 6 or 9 months ago, that's, you know, it's not going up anymore, like at the crazy rate. But I think, you know, I agree with you 100% that the average Joe knows that inflation hit, that their grocery bills is a ton higher, and that there's something wrong, and that their paycheck hasn't gotten any bigger, right? I mean, it is kind of interesting, this dichotomy you have, right? Because you have a lot of Bitcoiners that talk about, you know, all the signs that you're pointing out, right? I mean, inflation's crazy. Everybody's expenses gone up, rent got higher, you know, all these things. But, you know, the traditional finance people think that it's all kind of, I guess, like even keel at this point. So it is kind of interesting to see all that. But I think, you know, there's a lot of cracks under the macro surface, which, you know, as Bitcoiners, we all kind of see, right? The credit card debt at an all-time high, like personal savings getting depleted, like all these different factors. But, you know, the job numbers have been okay. But whether you believe those or not, I don't know. I mean, I personally don't really, just from personal experience and kind of anecdotally from some friends. So I think, you know, people are starting to more wake up to the fact of, you know, inflation is, you know, rampant. There's, you know, the system is not really built to help out the middle to low class. And I think people are going to get growingly more frustrated as we get, you know, through these next couple of years, to say the very least.
I mean, you don't even have to walk down the street and ask people. If you just go to your phone and scroll through TikTok or, you know, Instagram, you will see the reality of people actually having to vent into the void of the internet because they cannot afford groceries, they cannot afford their rent, they have to get 2-3 jobs in order to make ends meet, and they are just simply desperate at this point. So the fact that these people are saying like, oh no, it's all good, guys, you guys can go and live your best life, people are literally freaking out on how they're going to be paying for their lifestyle, their bills. And it's not like they're living crazy lifestyles. It's just the basic things that they need: rent, food, and whatever they need in order to pay their bills. They're freaking out over this. And I know you have made videos about this, Kinetic Energy, about, you know, how people are freaking out. I think it was this year that they did the song came out, the Richmond from Richmond, and people are just like vibing with that song because that's the sentiment of a lot of people right now. It's all of these elites are just in their high chair eating whatever they want, living their best life, and you have all these other people that are just trying to make it day to day, suffering, figuring out what they're going to do. And we're also talking about America, what's supposed to be one of the richest countries in the world, and people are struggling. So if that's happening in America, imagine what's happening in other parts of the world where we're not as blessed as we are here. It feels like the Hunger Games at this point, where you have like the rich district and then all these other people just fighting for their life every single day.
You have people on BNN. Like BNN is kind of like the Canadian version of CNBC. It's exactly what you would expect as the Canadian version of CNBC to be. Like, it even looks like that. But you have these guys go on BNN talking about, yeah, we need to lower rates. We need to lower rates. And they're losing their minds, right? They're losing their minds because to them, inflation has been calmed. It's been tamed. And they're worried about their assets, right? Like, they're worried about their commercial real estate assets going to the shitter. So they want to lower the rates, not even thinking that, oh yeah, if we lower rates too soon, we're going to get another inflationary spike, because they don't care, right? And it's right. It does feel like Hunger Games, and people are so distant. Like these people on TV are so far removed from what the average person is feeling, and I don't know how this ends well. Like, I hope it does. Like, I'm optimistic. Like I, you know, I'm a Bitcoiner. I hope that Bitcoin comes in like a shining horse, you know, like this shining orange horse, and rides in and fixes the world. But I don't know, man. It's ugly out there.
I don't know where you guys are getting all your fake news from, but Paul Krugman said that we defeated inflation, and all you have to do is like, don't look at food prices, energy, shelter, used cars, and it's all good, dude. So I don't know. I mean, if you guys want to be all doomers about this whole inflation thing, you go for it. What I care about is my phone bill and the price of I don't know, gift cards or something. So yeah, I don't know.
Speaking of inflation and phone bills,
inflation was defeated. No, but in all sincerity, I think the new normal. I was trying to figure out the other day, like, where did this 2% inflation thing come from? I think Jerome Powell was asked that, and he said, "Oh, we sort of just decided on it a while ago." But I was digging into it, and I found out that, like, I think one of the central bankers from New Zealand came up with that number, and everyone just said, "Okay, sounds good." And then in 2008, Ben Bernanke, he was the first central banker in America who cited that number and said, well, that's sort of the one that we should aim for as well. But there's not a single paper written. And I thought in my head, well, somewhere some fiat economist has somehow landed on 2% as a good number, and maybe there's something to that and it'd be cool to read about that. There's nothing. There's not a single piece of academic work that says 2% inflation is what we should aim for, but they all parrot it like they're a cult who came up with this, and they all just like consensus agreed on it. So if that's the case, and what we've seen now, Brandon, is basically we flatlined at 3%. You know, there's a lot of deflationary forces out there. Like the price of a Tesla dropped, I think 30% this year. One of the Model 3s, they've gone down like crazy. I have the cheapest phone plan I've ever had. I have more data and a cheaper monthly phone plan than I've ever had in my life. And, you know, there are deflationary forces out there, and we still can't get under 3%. Like things have really slowed in a lot of the sectors of the economy, and we still can't get under 3%. So the next piece of news is that 3% is the new benchmark, and we've defeated inflation, and we can hold rates steady as long as that 3% kind of stays around there, and then slowly lower them to meet that 3%.
And will anybody believe that 3%?
It's gaslighting squared, that's for sure.
No, we had you mentioned the phone bills a couple of times. Like, I don't know, you guys, the Americans that are listening in, and the Americans up here, Camila and Brandon. A couple of months ago, you guys had a print in your inflation and your CPI about health insurance somehow going down something like 34%. And couple of the guys in the Bitcoin community were like, what the hell? Like, where did that come from? Like one of these numbers, like did health insurance go down 34% month over month? And everybody was like, no. Well, in Canada, we had it last month with phone bills. So mysteriously, the Canadian phone bill part of CPI went down like 23% month over month. If you believe it or if you don't, but that's what the number said.
It's all
And if you believe that there is sort of like a populist movement towards conservatism or libertarianism, like the first thing that all these new governments from Javier Milei to Gert Wilders, what they're doing is they're just removing red tape. So that will bring down prices in some sense over the next year or next 2 years, and that will have material impact. Like I keep seeing all these TikToks about, you know, when you buy fuel, how much of it in Canada is carbon tax, and that's just like a pen stroke away if the Conservatives get a majority in our country 2 years from now. And, you know, if Trump gets his way, he'll start putting stuff like that in place too. So there are deflationary pressures, but again, like Boomer, you've said before on my show, it's a vector. It's like everyone has a different metric. You know, to me, I guess the most important one is the biggest demographic in the country coming up are millennials. They're all of the age where they should be affording to buy homes. So for them, the only thing that's going to matter inflation-wise is going to be the cost of a home. Everything else is just secondary to that. And you know, if those continue to keep doing what they're doing, then nobody will feel that inflation is abating in any sense.
Yeah, as a millennial here in America, I agree. It's like that American dream is just kind of fading away more and more as years
Camila, you look like you have a
come.
nice home behind you, though.
This is like me manifesting.
Oh, what? It's a scam? Oh, man, they've inflated away real homes, too. God damn.
They just make nice backgrounds to make you happy.
The one thing that we
in
do have in the US, though, that is a little bit better than Canada is like the 30-year fixed rate. I think, like, you know, obviously, like the Canadian real estate market's a little bit tougher than it is in the States. But what I do see about the real estate market kind of going is they're going to come out with more. I mean, there's products right now with like VA. If you were in the military, you could put 0% down. But I think that those products and services, at least my theory, is going to those will be more widely, I guess, accessible to the average person. Like right now, we only need 3.5%, but I think that number is going to slowly start to come down. We saw Rocket Mortgage this year actually start to toss that idea out. So I think that's going to be the next move. And then soon enough, when those 0%, you know, zero down or whatever products for homes just make, you know, the average monthly payment like $4 or $5 grand for a house, I think, you know, people in the end are just not going to be able to afford that payment anymore. And that's when I think we hit the point. So I don't think we're there yet in American real estate, but I definitely think like it's, you know, the time is coming.
Yeah, maybe timeshares will make a comeback. That feels like we're ripe for that. Brandon, what was your biggest, in your opinion, the biggest macro or finance moment of 2023?
Yeah, so I mean, it is kind of going along with what Boomer did. It kind of was 2022 playing into 23, but I think the interest rates were, you know, kind of the big topic of conversation throughout the entire year. Powell just keeping interest rates up the entire year. You know, higher for longer was kind of the narrative, right? Everybody was calling for the pivot. The market was calling for a pivot in March of this year, then in the summer, then in September, and now they're waiting until next year. And, you know, everybody that was screaming for a pivot, you know, for the past year and a half is now jumping for joy because, you know, Powell is kind of hinting at that. But I think in the end, it's made the US dollar a little bit stronger. And, you know, the United States as a whole, the economy is kind of, I guess, holding up a little bit better than globally. But I think it woke up, you know, everybody around the world to the fact that, like, hey, you know, Jerome Powell has so much power where he can, you know, control interest rates, control markets with just what he says anytime he gets at the podium. Where now, you know, some of these countries, obviously we saw El Salvador, but, you know, I think Argentina's up next. You know, Julian, you were just in Peru. I wouldn't be surprised if more of these Latin American countries that are experiencing, you know, a lot of hyperinflation, or these countries that are on a dollar standard start to get annoyed where it's like, hey, you know, the US is benefiting for a lot of these things, whether it's, you know, stimulus, inflating away the currency, or, you know, destroying the offshore dollar market where, a lot of people are going to start to look for alternatives. So I think that was kind of the big narrative that I'm taking away. And I think that traditional finance is going to remember is that Powell kind of stuck to his guns and kept interest rates extremely elevated, which put the pressure on a lot of the globe here. So, which I think has kind of raised tensions, so to speak. So I think that's leaving the door open for an orange future in my eyes.
One of the things that surprised me, despite the monetary tightening, is actually some of the countries I went to, Costa Rica and Mexico, have had record rallying years versus the U.S. dollar. Like, I don't have the exact number, but I think the Mexican peso is up 12% versus the U.S. dollar in the last year, and then the Costa Rican colone is up. I think it broke like 20-year highs this year versus the dollar. So anybody who's exercising just like a modicum of fiscal restraint is even beating the dollar. The Canadian dollar lost, but every other Latin American country that's an actual exporter did well.
And we didn't lose that bad. Like, our central bank also showed a lot of restraint as well in keeping rates pretty high. And we have more pressure, I think, like what Brandon said before about the mortgages, like, because our mortgages roll over every 5 years, there was more political pressure on our central bank to reduce rates than in the US. And, Tiff and company over at the Bank of Canada, give them some credit. Like, they kept it up, like, and, nothing has broken so far. But I don't know how much longer the smaller central banks like we have can keep pace with what you guys are doing in the States. We just can't do it.
Yeah, 100%. And I just think, yeah, I mean, kind of as you're saying there, Boomer, it's, a lot of countries were able to kind of sustain where, some of them obviously experienced massive amounts of hyperinflation. So it was like kind of, I guess, region specific. But I think, bottom line, more people are waking up to the fact that it's like, hey, Jerome Powell is the puppet master here, pulling the strings, so to speak.
2023 was certainly the year that the central banks became, front page stories for most people, right? Did anybody know who Jerome Powell was? Tiff Macklem? Like, how many Canadians? Not as many Canadians know who Tiff Macklem is as Americans know who Jerome Powell is. But it was pretty close to 0% 2 years ago knew who Tiff Macklem was, and I bet you it's 10-15% of Canadians know who our governor of our central bank is.
I think it just brings up the point that a lot of people have no idea how our systems work. They have no idea what's going on, who's pulling strings,
but they know something's wrong.
But they know something's wrong, exactly, because they can say as much as they want on TV, like, things are going great, guys, but then you look at your own home and you're like, wait a minute, I can't be the only one who's broken here. Like, it's a whole communities, and now you guys are talking whole countries that are starting to figure this out, which is very, very interesting to see how it plays out with people and countries waking up. What are they going to look out for as their life raft later on? Because it can't be the dollar, even though that's what a lot of countries think, which kind of brings me to my macro thing, if I can, which is I think the biggest thing that happened was, to me at least, zooming out and looking in Latin America, was when the president of Argentina, he won, and he's now going after central banks, saying that you guys are the problem and trying to just like cut them out. Like, I don't want you guys to exist anymore. I think that's crucial and very eye-opening, because a lot of Latin American countries don't do that. They don't know who to blame. They blame the other party for the financial problems that are going on in the country, but are not actually going to where the money printing is going on. So I think him actually going up against the central bank and saying that I'm just going to nix you guys out is probably a domino to other countries opening their eyes and trying to realize, okay, what is going on? I think him going to the dollar is like the next step before Argentina adopts Bitcoin as legal tender later on, just like El Salvador. El Salvador probably took that step because it was already under the US dollar. It was dollarized country. So I think those are the next steps that are going to happen. But having these political figures go after central banks to me is bonkers, is crazy. And he won. So I think he's actually going to do it, which will be magnificent to watch as their world crumbles, their little central banks start to crumble, because I do think they're part of the problem.
His Javier Milei's inauguration speech was really interesting because, like, the number one thing they tell you if you run for office is you can't run on austerity. You have to run on promising people things. And his whole speech was, the government left us with this mess and there's going to be a lot of pain. And one of the first things he did was devalue the peso overnight, the real rate, or the government rate. They got closer to the real rate, the black market rate, and started firing people. 5,000 government employees fired, 12 of the 21 ministries shut down. But his speech, it was like really sombering, basically saying, hey, like, this is going to be really painful, but it's going to be worth it by the end. I think, Camila, to your point, I think all these central bankers around the world, Federal Reserve, Central Bank of Europe, whatever you want to call them, they're like vampires. And when you put sunlight on them, that's their weakness. They don't like that. Literally, the inception of the Federal Reserve was done in back rooms, secret meetings, JP Morgan gathering a bunch of bankers to set up these banks. Is a central bank a private corporation or a public corporation? Well, the banks own the shares, but the Federal Reserve is exempt from taxation. So there's all these like weird rules. The Federal Reserve and the central banks, they're all like happy when no one is talking about them. But when they become a touch point in culture, when they become a touch point in political issues, they're exposed, and their weakness is abundant to kind of everyone. And I think Javier Milei is the first politician who ran on an anti-central bank platform. More than, I would say, I think he spent more time attacking the central bank than he spent attacking the opposing governments, really. I mean, he does rally against the state, but like so much of his rhetoric was like, the banks are stealing from the people. And he won on that. And that's amazing. And I hope that, we see other versions of that pop up in other countries. I think Argentina is an exception with their inflation. I think Javier Milei is like a really special, interesting guy. But now we have, our first libertarian, minarchist president of the world. And I think that opens the floodgates for other like-minded people who can do the same thing in their respective countries to really push on.
Let's not crown this guy just yet. Like he's only been in there, 6 weeks? And his first.
I'm not judging him on his results yet, but I'm just saying from a platform standpoint, there is no equal, really.
For sure. But do remember that he took a private jet to Washington within hours of winning the election to meet with the Clintons and other characters from the United States.
Did you not get the invite?
No, I definitely was not invited to that one. No, not a fan.
Bummer. Next time.
But sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I just wanted to say it's super interesting, like the Latin American culture, how we see it. They see the United States as the all-powerful, right? We want to be like America. If America could do it, we want to be able to do it. So of course he's going to be shaking hands with the devil, I want to say it, the devil, to try to, get up to that level, to try to get themselves out of the hole that they're in, the hole that their people are in, to try to like rub shoulders or elbows or whatever you want to call it with the all powerful, to see if some of that can come back to Argentina, is the way I see it. But it's very interesting how it sparks conversations throughout other people from Latin America. For example, in my family, I'm almost 30. This is the first year that I've heard family members actually talk about presidents from other Latin American countries and how they wish that what's going on over there is happening in other countries in Latin America, like Colombia, like Peru. They start saying things like, we need someone like them to come and put order in our countries. So I think it's definitely a cultural shift that is very big, that is going to continue to get bigger. It started with El Salvador, because that's the guy that everyone's looking up to, right? Now you have someone from Argentina. Now you look at, I'm Colombian, so I look at videos that come out of Colombia, but politicians that are calling themselves the Colombian Bukele or something like that. It's bonkers how this energy is starting to spread. And yes, it's not about Bitcoin, even though honestly we're cheering for whoever's pro Bitcoin to kind of get on top. But I think this is going to start to become a disease that, if politicians saw that this guy went up against central banks and won based on that platform, they're not going to be afraid to do that in their own countries anymore and actually go, try to solve these issues. And like Julian said, put the light on the vampires that are literally sucking the life out of these countries.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it even a step further. I think, it kind of started even, back in 2016 in the United States when, Trump got elected. I think like everybody is just kind of, I guess annoyed with being fed these lies, that politicians get up there and every single, election cycle, they promise X, Y, Z, and then they don't come through with any of those promises. So I think, it's just, I guess kind of, almost like a disease or the voter or whoever wants to put these people in place. Every single country is kind of getting annoyed by being told the same lie over and over and over again. And now I think, with the spread of social media too, like, we have these videos, we have the receipts every single year, these, the receipts of what politician would said, 4 years ago or whatever it was, 8 years ago, or however long they've been a politician. These things recycle. And so I think people are starting to wake up to the fact like, hey, whoever it is said this like, 10 years ago, and now all of a sudden they're flip-flopping it because this is where the money's coming from. So I think, in the end, more Latin American countries are waking up to this, and, they have the most to gain from, the switch. And I think, obviously Bitcoiners are rooting for these candidates because they mention Bitcoin, but I think it's also part of the ethos, just being able to resonate with, the freedom money that is Bitcoin. I think kind of, lets Bitcoiners, I guess, feel like they know a little bit more about these presidential candidates' morals, so to speak. But obviously, you never really want to trust a politician 100%. But it is encouraging to see, Bitcoin being on the ballot in multiple countries across the world where it's definitely a talking point. And, if you were to tell me this, like, I guess 5 or 6 years ago when I got into Bitcoin, that, it would be on the ballot in multiple countries and I'd be paying attention to, the Argentinian election, I'd be telling you you're crazy. So it's crazy where Bitcoin has taken us, but it's awesome to see. And I think, I'm looking forward to more of it in 24.
We're seeing a lot in Africa as well, too, right? I think that kind of goes like so many things over the past 100 years. We downplay everything that happens in Africa, but look at what happened in Niger this year, breaking away from the French, and that was a big deal. Like that was a really, really big deal. And Camila, and I agree with you. It is spreading. Like it definitely feels that it's spreading, and it's going to spread to the places that need it the most first. And Argentina is a strange case because Argentina is simultaneously an incredibly wealthy country. Like Argentina was one of the richer countries in the world not that long ago, right? Like beautiful architecture, abundant natural resources, a smart people, like they're an educated people. Like and central banks have screwed them over for the past 40 years. And it seems that they just had enough.
And politicians,
right? And so we'll see. I mean, I guess maybe Venezuela would be the next logical one from that region.
I heard I heard there was someone running against Putin in the 2024 Russia elections. I wish them luck, but
but Venezuela is such a prime example of the harm that politicians and central banks can do to a country, because just like you were mentioning Argentina, Venezuela, one of the richest nations, and look at where they are now. So that's the story that, we want to take as example. We don't want to become that, because I always say if we're not careful, the US can become such a thing as well. If we just are not caring about what's going on and just giving up our liberties, that's what we have to keep paying attention, because we're not immune to becoming the next Venezuela if the generations are not careful.
Well,
with paying
as
attention.
a Canadian, the story of Venezuela, I hope that we look at that one especially closely as Canadians, because there are some similarities in our natural resources and what have you.
I think there's a bright future for revolutions and protests in the US, because I think part of the reason that, people don't get as upset as they do over political stuff down there is because the bread and circuses are that good in America. Like, look how many great TV shows have come out in the last 2-3 years, video games. But now, because of the writer's strike, there's nothing good is going to come out.
Taylor Swift is still around. As long as there's Taylor Swift
if you
and
have
football, there's bread and circus
for a ticket. But Taylor Swift aside, that's a good bread and circus. All the media is gone in 24. So I'd be on your tiptoes if I was a politician in 24. I think people are ready to take to the streets. The distractions are fading away a little bit. I jest. I'll throw in my biggest macro thing for 23, and then we'll dive into the predictions. To me, and it wasn't like a big headline story, it was just one of those sneaky things that they throw in there. There was all the SVB stuff. We didn't even touch upon that, which is crazy. It's like we've all forgotten that 2 or 3 of the biggest bank collapses in American history happened this year. But a big part of the reason that we have not talked about that and no one cares anymore is because of the bank term funding program. The stealth QE that I think is led to basically a massive outperformance in Bitcoin this year, a massive outperformance in gold this year, and also the S&P basically coming back to all-time highs. So for those who don't know, the bank term funding program was announced right after the collapse of SVB on March 11th of 2023. And it essentially was a way for banks to shore up liquidity if they were in the similar situation where they were stuck with all these, bonds that had lost a whole bunch of value. And what the program lets you do is it lets you go to the Federal Reserve, post all your bonds at collateral. Maybe they're worth 80 cents on the dollar, 70 cents on the dollar. Some of the really bad ones, 40 cents on the dollar. It lets you go to the Federal Reserve and actually get cash 1-for-1 for the dollar value of those bonds. So even if you're underwater 50%, they'll give you a cash loan based on if you are basically on par with it. And this program immediately out the gate following the SVB collapse, it had I think $100 billion of redemptions, people using it. There's no limit to that program. So every single negative yielding bond, if you're an eligible institution, you can go and you can lend it to the Fed and they'll give you the cash. There is an interest rate on it, but basically it opened the floodgates for potentially up to $4 trillion of underwater bonds to go in and essentially just get cash to shore up liquidity. So with that program opening, it essentially eradicated the risk of all bonds in the US. And when you do something like that, you don't actually eradicate risk, you introduce currency risk. So basically the Fed said, hey, if your bond is underwater, don't worry about it. You're not going to have to shut down anymore. We'll give you the cash, but you have to ask, where does this cash come from? The Federal Reserve just creates it. So it's just another form of quantitative easing. And so the plan initially was when this launched, they were going to take care of, SVB, Signature, and then First Republic happened a month later. And then the plan, when they announced it, they said it's going to be a year-long thing, and then we're going to want people to, take their bonds back and pay back their cash and figure out the liquidity situation by March 11th of 2024. That was in the initial press statement. You can look at it today. It said this is a 1-year program. If you look up the chart of the bank term funding program, starting at the end of October, it's actually ramped up. It kind of topped out between May to October of this year. Everyone borrowed that needed to borrow, and then nothing. And then all of a sudden in October, it starts ticking up. Massive increase, $40 billion of more people using this program, and it's accelerating. It's still ripping right now. That also correlates with Bitcoin starting to rip basically at the beginning of November. The markets, pivoting at the end of November because of Jerome Powell's speech. The market is, the Federal Reserve is stealth QEing everything with this bank term funding program. And as long as rates are as high as they are, people are going to keep borrowing from this thing in perpetuity. So rant over. My thing is that the Federal Reserve will always find sneaky ways to print money without printing the money. Quantitative easing, bank term funding program. But I think that marks the moment where basically they said, well, whatever happens with interest rates, don't worry, we got your back. And that opens the floodgates for risk assets to continue doing what they're doing.
So this program is set to expire in March.
It says March 11th, 24.
So
said,
what are the probabilities? What are the probabilities that this program actually expires in March?
Zero.
Pretty close
They're
to
gonna
zero,
extend it.
right?
So obviously they're going to extend it.
Well, it's just like with student loans, right? I mean,
Yes.
like, you know, they were going to forgive student loans in the US, and that was like a big thing that, you know, Joe Biden ran on, and, you know, they didn't end up forgiving it. They just didn't require anybody to pay anything back until just like fairly recently. And I'm sure, like, you know, some of these people just, you know, got used to not paying student loans for 3.5, almost 4 years, and, you know, just kind of skated by, and now they have an extra $200 payment and they didn't pay that. And majority of student loans were given out by the United States government, at least here in the US. So I mean, there's a lot of these like macro factors that they, you know, I guess like help to the consumer, so to speak, that they just don't really call it money printing, but in a way it's, you know, giving people more access to capital, right?
And it is all inflationary, guys. Like, all of this is inflationary. All of it.
So inflationary.
2008, 2009, when it looked like the financial world was going to collapse, they stimulated the shit out of the banks and they kept it afloat, and they destroyed any chance that they were ever going to get anything back into control ever again. It was
and
over.
How many people went to jail? Like
one
that committed all of these crimes?
One guy.
He must feel like the biggest chump, like seeing all this go on from his prison cell.
And I'm sure it was a pretty cushy jail as well. I don't imagine he had to worry too much about gruel in his gulags. But the moral hazard is real, and when you create programs that will always bail you out, then what do? You go further and further out on the risk curve, and you take more and more risk because you know you're going to get bailed out all the time. And at least with 2008 and 2009, I thought inflation was going to go nuts. And I think a lot of people did. And that's when I kind of became a gold bug, is back then, because I thought it was over. Like I thought like inflation is here. And to be honest, we didn't really see a whole lot of inflation over the next 15 years. I think it was kind of shocking that we didn't have enough. So then COVID happened. Well, I mean, there were probably tremors of it in 2018, 2019, all that stuff, but we'll leave that to another day. So then COVID happens, and they realize they have to stimulate again. And instead of stimulating the banks like they did last time, which was kind of political suicide, like, you know, the Occupy Wall Street stuff, and it just looked really bad. They were like, okay, well, now we're going to stimulate the average person. We'll stimulate the normal person. So then they do that with SERP here in Canada, and what was the stimmies in the United States. But guess what happens when you stimulate consumers? They consume. So, and guess what happens when consumers consume? Prices go up, right? So all this stuff, it's all inflationary. And to think that we've defeated inflation when we still have these programs going on is completely insane.
And who voted for these programs, by the way? Like,
most people don't even understand these programs.
Like,
I don't understand this program.
Yeah, exactly. They just do them behind closed doors. Like, yep, this is what we're going to do. We don't care what people think. We're just going to bail out our friends. And it's a cycle over and over again, which is, they're going to continue it if we live in this fiat world. They're just going to keep bailing out their friends.
And they make it complicated to understand. The average person, never mind the average person. How many people do you think even among Bitcoin? Well, in Bitcoiners, we've kind of done the work a little bit, but take an average 100 people off the street. How many people of them understand how a bond works?
They don't even know what money is.
And they don't understand money. They don't understand money. Like I would say 80% don't understand money, but probably 75% don't even understand compound interest. So they don't understand compound interest, but they're expected to understand how bonds work? Absolutely not. Right? And these people know this. These people that make these programs, they know that the average person doesn't understand.
Yeah, it sucks. All I have to say, though, is I hope you guys bought Bitcoin with your stimulus checks, because that's what I did.
I did. And apparently us Canadians are flirting with getting UBI. So I'm stoked. That's going to make my sat stacking just so much better. So yes, please pass UBI in Canada. Can't wait to use that for more Bitcoin.
Accelerate.
All right. 2024 predictions. Let's get these bullet pointed out. We'll just go through all of ours. Won't need to comment on it, but I'm just curious to hear, what are your 2024 Bitcoin or market predictions? Starting with you, Boomer.
Hash rate will go up more than price. I'm a little bit. I'm not going to say I'm bearish on price. Like, I do think that we're going to have a good year. I don't think we're going to have as good a year as a lot of people think. I think there's going to be more volatility. Like, I think things could get weird with the ETF. I think we could have candles going up and down. But I'm more bullish on hash rate than I am on price. And I guess on the finance side, rates are going to come down, but maybe not for the reason that everybody thinks. I think rates are going to come down because shit might hit the fan.
Brandon, what about you?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, Boomer. But I'm on the other end of the spectrum, man. I think we're going to see six-figure Bitcoin. We're going to see over 100K. And let me tell you why real quick, because, obviously we have the ETF news coming. We got rates, that are going to start to pull back, right? And I think people are going to start to find an asset that is looking for some dramatic returns, right? Because we have the consumer that is potentially hurting a little bit. And I think people are going to start to flood to Bitcoin when we got the ETF rates and the halving all coming up. So I think the FOMO is going to set in, not as much paper Bitcoin being issued, and off to the races. So I don't think we're going to hit the all-time high of this cycle at this year, but I do think we're going to hit over six figures by the end of this year, end of next year. I guess maybe I'll put it out there. Like maybe I should try to make a bet or something like that. If it doesn't hit six figures, I got to do something crazy. I don't know. Maybe
we should have qualified that none of this is financial advice, by the way.
Exactly.
Like, none of it. We're just four people hanging out on a Friday night talking. Like, do not take our financial advice. Do not.
Brandon, I have a bet for you. Okay. End of the year 2024. If it's not over 100K, you have to eat a Carolina Ghost Reaper pepper and do an interview with me. And if it is over 100K, I'll do the same with you. And we'll do it all live.
All right, let's do it.
All right.
Cool. I was gonna be a little bit more dramatic, like say, like I'll cut off like.
How's your spice tolerance? Is it good?
Sorry.
How's your spice tolerance?
Not. It's okay. It's okay. But
all right. We'll get like a 2 or 3 of them then. Just rip our faces off. If it's over 100K, I bear the brunt. If it's under 100K, then
all right, man, let's do it. We'll have to do it in person. We'll have to figure out a place to do it. Maybe you have to come down to Florida so you can.
It's gonna make one of us cry.
You guys are gonna be in Montreal, right? Like Brandon.
That's May, though.
May.
By the end of the year, we'll figure out.
You're cutting out like 7 months.
Yeah, you're talking
maybe,
about
maybe
we're gonna have to do like the next
24 because that's in December. So
yeah. 2025.
We'll figure it out. But yeah, one of us is gonna cry. That's all I know.
Sounds good to me, man. Let's do it.
Well, I'm also a bull, and I think it's going to go over $210,000 just because I like the number 21 and adding zeros at the end. But in all honesty, like, I'm split. I want the price to go up, but I don't think I'm mentally ready for that yet. And I want to be able to just buy as much more Bitcoin as possible and educate my family and try to orange pill them before this goes hyperbolic again. So I'm not eating a pepper though. That's all I'm saying.
All right. Well, only Brandon or I will feel the pain. Okay, I guess I'm the only one who doesn't think it's going to go above 100K US next year. But I think we'll have a less volatile this year than we did in 2023. I think that the previous all-time high should be tough resistance for a bit. I think, like Boomer, I think something's going to hit the fan. And I think because that we have the ETFs, Bitcoin will start to be a lot more correlated next year. But I don't think it'll be a bad year for Bitcoin. I just think that the high will be between 69 and 95K US, which means it will go over 100K Canadian, but not 100K US. I also think that miners are going to feel this added pressure to, now that they're somewhat profitable, they're going to be getting rid of some of their Bitcoin that they've stashed up over the last little bit. But who knows? Maybe Saylor will end up buying it all as well. I also think that like the U.S. government will probably use the ETFs to clear some of their Bitcoin, so that could also be, it's quite a bit of supply entering the market. So I don't know. I just have I don't think it's gonna be a bad year. I just think this year was a whopper of a good year. So I don't want to get too excited for next year. But 25, I think, is the one where everything just rips.
What do you guys think about the ETF approval? Like, what's going to happen within a week of the approval?
Spike and sell the news, but we're still going to be around 40K. I don't know.
I agree.
I think higher than we are today, even after the sell the news, though. So
do you think we ever see 30K again?
Maybe. I don't want to say no, but
I want to. I want to see 30K again.
I'm ready. Okay. A couple other.
I'll put my foot down. I will be the one that says I don't think we see another dip like that.
Okay. A couple other predictions I have. I don't think any single one of these ETFs, BlackRock included, with the exception of Grayscale, because they already have a ton of Bitcoin, I don't think a single one of these ETFs is going to be able to accumulate as much Bitcoin as MicroStrategy does. Right now, I think it's about 6 or 7 billion that they have. But I think between Fidelity, BlackRock, everyone thinks that like BlackRock's going to be far and away the biggest ETF. I don't think so. I think if Grayscale gets approved, they're gonna take up a bulk of this. And then Fidelity also is like a big issuer, Van Eck. So I don't know. I think the whole BlackRock thing will fade away. Like they'll have their ads, they'll have their product, but I don't think it'll be the biggest Bitcoin ETF, and it won't be bigger than MicroStrategy, at least in the first year.
Well, Grayscale, how there's no way they're going to catch Grayscale.
Yeah, I mean they have like 3 or 4% of the supply. So like, where's the Bitcoin coming from? Like I'm not going to sell it. Maybe if it goes to 100 or 200K, you can make me part with a little bit, but like no one's realistically going to, the 5% of the Bitcoin supply is not going to just show up out of these wallets that haven't moved for a year just because the price is up another 30%. So they're not going to have it. My other prediction is in cool news, btcmap.org. I have the stats here. Let me just find it. btcmap.org is like a site where you can see all the Bitcoin merchants around the world. There are some that take Bitcoin that are not on this site, but most of them are. They have 9,647 merchants on there today that accept Bitcoin. I think by the end of next year, it'll be 20,000 or higher that accept Bitcoin, which means in your city, you'll be able to spend Bitcoin, hopefully. In my city, there's 70 places. Hopefully it's 140 by next year. And then my other prediction, going back to the bank term funding program, it's going to be renewed. And the quote for that is, who said it? Was it Milton Friedman or someone said that nothing is more permanent than a temporary government program? And BTFP will be renewed for another year and maybe another 10 years. But yeah, that's my prediction sign.
How about, guys, a question for you guys. First nation state, major nation state to admit they're in the mining game.
Oh, someone in the Middle East for sure.
I'm going to say Russia.
Russia.
Russia's already in it. I don't know. It's
they're going to announce. I think they're going to announce.
I don't know. I don't think Russia wants that press.
2024.
I think they'll keep on the DL. Like if they were going to do it, they keep on the DL.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, Boomer. I don't know. I think a Latin American country will probably announce before. I mean, like El Salvador hasn't really, I guess, like come out with the volcano mining yet. Does that count? Because maybe that's
they've already announced. Like if Argentina announced, then that would count. But Argentina already have quite a bit of mining operations, right? So but I mean nationalized. Like I'm talking about like a nation state getting into the mining game.
You guys don't think it'll be a Middle East country? I think it'll be like
well, Oman has already announced.
Oman, I mean, they're basically doing it.
They've announced.
It's got to be a country with like a ton of excess energy.
But I want it to be a major country. Like Bhutan doesn't count. Oman, I mean, I guess Oman are a major country, but a big boy, like a top 30 country.
Like a Russia.
Like Russia.
Kazakhstan was a top miner for a while. I don't know if that's changed.
Still in hash rate, they're up there. I think they're number 3.
Yeah, maybe they'll nationalize. 4. I dig it. All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. And thanks everyone for watching the show. Those are our predictions. Those are our recaps. If you had any that we missed, I'd love to hear it in the comment section down below. And yeah, Happy New Year to everyone. Next 2 or 3 days, we're going to be hitting that 24 mark. And I'll see all you guys in the new year. Thanks, Boomer. Thanks, Camila. Thanks, Brandon, for coming on.
Thanks,
And
guys.
yeah, we'll have to get together again soon.
Sounds good. Bye.
Take care. Peace.